Good morning. A number of years ago, well, maybe 3 decades now, the Episcopal Church published a hymnal called Lift Every Voice and Sing. And it's a hymnal of spirituals, slave songs, many of the hymns that some of us grew up on. And one day at a clergy conference, Bishop Barbara Harris decided that we, the clergy, needed to really learn some of these songs correctly. Now, Barbara was the first woman to be ordained to be consecrated bishop in the Episcopal Church. She was an African-American woman. And she was also a very accomplished pianist, jazz amongst other things, but spirituals were one of her specialties. So she decided that we needed to learn Wade in the Water. It was part of the order of service for an event that we were at. And she decided that we were a little bit too wishy-washy singing it. So she taught us how to sing Wade in the Water. And I was so thrilled to see that it was one of the songs that we're singing today. And don't be surprised if you see a tear roll down my face, because I will think of that day and think of Barbara. My topic is the good path of wisdom, righteousness, justice, and equity. I'm confused. I will confess that. I'm confused. Every day standards change, rules change. There's a lot of, it depends on who you are type of stuff. And nothing that we have ever learned seems to still be in effect. We talk about justice and equity, but it seems that we need the situation, the cell video, the witness statements, and a whole host of opinions before any conclusion can be made. Justice and equity mean different things to different people. If you can pay for it, then that is one scenario. If you are a minority, then there is a different picture. If you're a woman, things are different yet. So I'm confused. When I began working on this piece, I had one set of ideas. That justice meant abiding by the content, intent, and text of the law, and equity was treating people with fairness and righteousness. But as I went along, another set of values, information, whatever you want to call it, came into my view. Neither was right, neither was wrong. Just very complex and needing discernment. So I did the thing that I know best, and I went to see what the Bible had to say. Just about everything that I read was from either the prophets or the wisdom literature. So here's a passage from Proverbs. My child, if you accept my words and treasure up my commandments within you, making your ear attentive to wisdom and inclining your heart to understanding, if you need, cry out for insight and raise your voice for understanding. If you seek it like silver and search for it as hidden treasure, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find knowledge of God. For the Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk blamelessly, guarding the paths of justice, preserving the way of his faithful ones. Then you will understand righteousness and justice and equity. There are some recurring themes there. Attentiveness, understanding, wisdom, knowledge, and insight. All of these principles come into the discussion when we talk about justice and equity. But in the real world, where justice and equity are not practiced, it is because these principles are lost or overlooked, and usually the wishes of one or two people seem to prevail. Then there is a following of people who aren't really sure who or what they're following, and the mob mentality takes over. The prophet Micah, in a conversation with the Lord, learns that what is required of us is to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God. It doesn't depend on the context. There's no wiggle room. And we find ourselves looking around and asking many questions in today's society. I actually went to the dictionary to find a definition for justice. And this is what I found. Just conduct, management, or treatment. I don't know about you, but when I was in school, we were warned not to define a word using some other form of the word. So I dug a little deeper and found this: a basis in morality, the right or the law, the quality of being fair. Those definitions don't really satisfy me because they're open to too much interpretation. A number of years ago, and I don't remember whose trial it was or which Senate inquisition was taking place, but there was a big discussion about the meaning of the word yes. Maybe you remember that. I think that we are having a similar time today defining the words justice and equity. In my mind, there is no context. I need to say at the outset, as a disclaimer, I am a scripture scholar, and much of what I do or say or study has its origin in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. As a result, when I went to the scripture for the use and definition of the words justice and equity, I found hundreds of examples of justice and only 14 for equity. I found a couple of interesting verses in Exodus, chapter 12, verse 1. You shall not spread a false report. You shall not join hands with the wicked to act as a malicious witness. I'm a graduate of Boston University, and even though it was about 100 years ago that I graduated, and I have never given them 1 cent of money, they continue to send me alumni publications. And a couple of weeks ago, I received one from the College of Arts and Sciences. It wasn't called that when I was there. And in the magazine was an extremely interesting article about NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. The article was about Julia Roginski, a Boston University graduate with a couple of degrees. She's a political consultant who was employed by a cable news network, which will be unnamed, where the boss sexually abused her and several other prominent women who are on the air. A non-disclosure agreement is a legal contract that forbids individuals from discussing particular information. That is the definition in the article. Their purpose is to silence workers for the purpose of keeping them from reporting misconduct and harassment. The women at the particular network had signed NDAs when they were either fired or resigned on their own. Ms. Roginski and one other woman began a nonprofit called Lift Our Voices, or LOVE, L-O-V, to help 1/3 of American workers who are bound by NDAs. The goal of the organization is to eradicate the concealment clause in NDAs that prevent people from speaking out about their workplace experiences. LOV has passed laws in Washington State, California, and New Jersey, and they helped pass 2 landmark pieces of federal legislation. The first one, the Ending Forced Arbitration of Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act, and the Speak Out Act. These are extremely important pieces of legislation. The women involved in these suits and firing from the network have had to earn a living through podcasts, because they are still thought to be too dangerous to put on the air. As someone who has had to deal with this subject in my own life, once as a teacher and once as a priest, the process is less than satisfying or complete. I was always looking over my shoulder because I was stalked, received harassing phone calls, and was followed. Ultimately, I had to call the police in one case, and in the other there was a restraining order put out against the individual, who it turned out had a 25-year history of abusing parishioners in another state. Neither the diocese nor the parish knew that particular thing when they hired him. I was the whistleblower. In the first case, the school department had a suspicion when they hired a particular person, but they could not confirm it at that time. I was the whistleblower. This is an important subject in light of information that's coming out about a notorious abuser who died in prison, allegedly at his own hands. We need to take the idea of an NDA seriously to educate young people, especially young women, not to get caught up in that trap, but to protect their work-life balance and to develop a healthy sense of self-worth. Fear is the motivating factor behind the abuser's activities and the documents which they support. We as human beings must take back our right to work in a safe environment, and I know that we are protected in doing so. That statement about malicious intent comes under the topic of justice for all. Justice for all. Then another interesting statement I found also in the book of Exodus was, "You shall not follow the majority in wrongdoing. When you bear witness in a lawsuit, you shall not side with the majority so as to pervert justice." And it goes on in Deuteronomy to give samples of injustice. When it comes to King David, it says in the book of 2 Samuel, "So David reigned over all Israel, and David administered justice and equity to his people." When we look around the world today, it seems as though there are thousands of definitions of justice and equity. When we take into consideration ethnicity, race, gender, country of origin, anthropological history, sociological conditions, which I guess we can't mention in Florida anymore, justice and equity have different meanings, different intensities, and different impacts. We have also discovered lately that economics and financial status have a whole lot to do with justice and equity. But I guess that we have always known that, but it seems more glaring now. When we can buy, how we can buy it, where we can buy it, controls how the world spins on its axis for a large segment of the population. There have always been haves and have-nots, but now under the lens of justice and equity, the differences are glaring. In several of our large cities, the number of people sleeping on the streets has skyrocketed. Around here in Florida, we have had homeless camps for a very long time. The police come in and clear out the area, and the folks who were living there simply move on to another location and start all over again. Justice would be to get real help for these people: medical help, psychological help, housing, food, and a host of other services. But all that costs money. And if the people affected aren't registered voters, then they're not worth the effort. Justice and equity. In ancient times, the rule for justice was an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. The purpose of that was so that justice, or in many cases punishment, would not exceed the severity of the penetrated act. It was to protect both parties. In today's society, that is not true. Today's justice has many factors to it, like power, money, status, grudges, and the voice of the people. In determining justice today, there are many things that have to be factored into the situation. Protests, social media, body cameras, cell phones, the political leanings of the courts, conservative or liberal. It isn't as simple as it used to be. But some say it is better, others say it's worse. When a negative event takes place in a neighborhood, the police now go around looking at doorbell footage to see if they can get the real story as to what happened. We never had that before. We know that eyewitnesses can be unreliable at times, so we depend on technology and now AI to fill the gaps. Our children can't vote, although their parents can. So what if there's a school shooting? Our kids aren't worth the effort. When I was in high school, it was a public school in the city of Boston. There was security. The school building was located in the worst part of Boston, but that's how it was. It was a school that took girls from all over the city, and the building had to be a pretty large one, so there we were. But at 9:05 a.m., when we were all in there, the door was locked. And in order to get in, you had to ring the doorbell. Heaven help you if you were late to school, because the interrogation process would begin. Now, this was not a school for juvenile delinquents. It was the top academic school for the girls in the city of Boston. Incidentally, the boys had one too. But their school was located in a much more posh area of the city. There was no open door policy. There was no open campus. There was strictness, rules, and a willingness to abide by those rules. I worry about the public schools in Florida with the open campuses, some security, but the opportunity to just walk onto a campus and walk around. I used to have a key club, the high school version of Kiwanis, at the Wiregrass Ranch High School in Wesley Chapel, and there were no barriers there. One day when I was there, we had an active shooter drill. If it had been a real situation, I'm not sure how many of us would have survived. But I digress with my examples, only in that our children deserve a life and an education where things are done right for them so that they can grow up and contribute to the society which raised them. But as school students, they can't vote, and so we continue to have school mass shootings. Justice. When there is a drama that takes place in the political or governmental or financial realms of life, and there are trials, oustings, possible punishments, and the like, we keep our eyes peeled for justice. Instead, we get lies, deviousness, large exchanges of money so that justice can be avoided. Now, that may sound a little jaded, but just think about some of the murder cases, extortion cases, perverted financial gains cases that have been in the news in the past few years. There seems to be scandal after scandal after scandal, and we ask ourselves where the justice is. To do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. Another story in Scripture is the story of Job. Now, among scholars, there's a debate whether this was a teaching tool or if it really happened. Job was a righteous man of means. He had a nice house, much livestock, a wonderful life, a nice wife, several children. But over a period of a few days, he lost everything. His friends tried to convince him that he had to have done something wrong in order to have all the misfortune happen to him. Even his wife was fed up with him. But he insisted that he was innocent. It got to the point where one day he sat on a tree stump and scraped the pus from his sores with a piece of a clay pot. And he insisted that he was innocent. In the end, Job said, I put on righteousness and it clothed me. My justice was like a robe and a turban. All was restored to Job and his family because he truly was a righteous man. Truth, honesty, uprightness go a long way. When we humans can be truly honest with ourselves and the world, justice is there. What perverts justice is a sense of entitlement that comes into many realms of our lives. But when that entitlement spills over into conduct and activity which have legal ramifications, then justice takes a different look. The entitlement often has us feeling that we are above the law, and we should be left to our own devices and desires. It is then that the whole of society loses, and everything turns to chaos. We hear a lot about equity these days, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Every company, organization, and entity has to have a department for those three elements. In theory, it is superb to make sure that there is equal opportunity for all and no one gets left behind, and that every segment of society has an equal voice and opportunities. It works particularly well when you have students in school who are disabled and who need to get certain equipment, certain books, certain things to help them. Then DEI works very well. But lately, though DEI, as it's called, has come under fire in several arenas, especially in higher education and social services. Equity gets defined as justice according to the natural law or right, especially freedom from bias or favoritism. Proverbs tell us that if a king judges the poor with equity, his throne will be established forever. When people are treated well as human beings with something to contribute to society, and they are allowed to live lives that are flourishing, equity is real. When I was a public school teacher years ago, I did not realize that we were living lives of equity. When we achieved a certain step on a pay scale or based on a number of years of service or academic degrees, then we were paid a certain wage. When I left teaching and took on my second calling, I found things to be different. Gender mattered, marital status mattered, academic degrees didn't seem to matter. Neither did the number of years of service. I was taken aback. When my husband was forced into retirement because he was attacked by a student, my parish told me that they didn't need to pay for my health insurance because I had a husband who had it. And it took a lot of hard conversation to explain that he was now on Medicare and I was left out. Grudgingly, they agreed to pay my medical insurance, which, by the way, was their responsibility all along. But when a woman is married and has a husband with benefits, she's often left out of the picture. We are struggling with the intricacies of women's health care. I believe that in the not-too-distant future, the discussion will come to the forefront as the discussion of who makes up a family. But most of all, the conversations will continue about living authentic lives and whether our genetic makeup at birth is the determining factor as to how we live our lives. We are in an age when one group of people believes that they can dictate to all of us as to how we are supposed to live and what we are supposed to believe. Eventually, we will discover that that kind of thinking will no longer fly. The idea of dictating life takes away the whole idea and practice of equity and justice. Especially with equity, there has to be freedom to think and to be. So what are justice and equity? Justice is abiding by the law, the intent of the law, and the spirit of the law without preconceived notions, prejudice, or without malice. Justice is blind, as the statute tells us. She does not see color, race, religion, or any other factor that would sway her decision. It's interesting that justice is portrayed as a female. What is equity? It is treating all people fairly without prejudice. It is being merciful to all people. Equity needs to be administered without considering whether the people involved are wealthy, educated, male, female, or politically connected. We have a long way to go. We have much work to do until all people have the same opportunities for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. May justice and equity be our guides, and may the watchwords of our life be the watchwords of our life together, along with those of the prophet Micah, to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly with our God. When we can do these things, life will improve. We will be much less judgmental, and we will look at others in a way that we see ourselves.